Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to Accelerated Health TV and radio show. I'm your host, Sara Banta. I'm a health coach, natural supplement expert, and a busy mom of three. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below so you're notified every week with my new podcast on Mondays and Tuesdays. And if you haven't already, join my free group coaching on Telegram with the link below. There is no downside. You just sit back and learn. I teach you on a daily basis with tips and tools to enhance your health, and you will be a part of a like-minded group to support you on your journey, in addition to truly taking control of your health. The protocols and supplements I discuss are all found at sarabantahealth.com. Today, I am so excited. We have Dr. Bill Campbell, who has earned his Ph.D. in exercise, nutrition, and preventative health from Baylor University. He's currently a professor of exercise science and director of the Performance and Physique Enhancement Laboratory at the University of South Florida. He is a certified strength and conditional specialist from the National Strength and Conditioning Association, and he's published over 200 scientific papers and abstracts, 3 textbooks, and 20 book chapters in areas related to physique enhancement, sports nutrition, resistance training, and dietary supplementation. Welcome, Bill. How are you today?
I am great, and thank you for the great introduction and for inviting me on your live podcast.
This is a topic that my listeners know I'm so passionate about because at the age of 47 and a woman, there's this propensity for the body to want to lose muscle and gain fat and throw away the bathroom scale. We've got to actually look at what our body is made up of, to look at that body composition, not just for physique and to look good in the mirror and to do our daily life, but for longevity reasons. And so that's why I'm so excited to be talking about how to maximize fat or muscle gain and fat loss, and really diving into using body composition analysis to do so. So before we get started, why don't you tell everybody the amount of research you've done, and 200 scientific papers and 3 textbooks. Obviously, you know what you're talking about. People looking at you obviously know that you are walking the walk because you're extremely fit. But why don't you tell a little bit more background behind what you do?
All right. So the biggest thing is I am a professor of exercise science at the University of South Florida. So that's the job title. And then part of my responsibilities are to direct a research lab. And the research lab, what we do is kind of 2 areas, performance, human performance, and the other is physique enhancement. And for the last few years, the focus has primarily been on physique enhancement. And what that implies is typically we're trying to help people lose body fat and maintain their muscle mass in the process. So the way that I like to describe who my research helps, it helps people optimize their physiques within a maintainable lifestyle. So my early career, I worked with or did research on females with obesity. And now I've gravitated a little bit more towards people who are already fit, who want to get even leaner. And there's not necessarily a health component there, because these people are generally already healthy. So I like to describe, or I think what best describes where I'm at on the spectrum in the profession is a little bit more on the vanity side. So there's a lot of exercise scientists that are doing health-related research, and I'm doing physique-related research. Now, the reality is, while I portray what I do with vanity, muscle, lower fat, the reality is there's a lot of health that I sneak in the back door that people who otherwise aren't concerned about their health if they're young, they're still getting it. So one example would be if we get younger females lifting weights, they're depositing bone mineral density that will benefit them for a lifetime. So that's something a lot of females, they just, like I have a teenage daughter. She doesn't care about her bone mineral density, but she's lifting weights and she wants bigger glutes. And I in my head, I'm like, hey, or not, even in conversations, hey, you're also doing a lot of great things for your metabolic health, for your bone density. And I know she doesn't care. She probably will one day. So there is a huge health component to what I do. But again, I approach it with people that are really wanting to focus on the muscle and fat compartments of their body.
I love what you just said, because as a mom of 3 kids, my number one piece of unsolicited parenting advice is you need to find out what each kid is motivated by and use that to connect their goal with it. So, okay, so you want to look fit, so you're taking your shirt off in front of your friends. Well, you need to eat the right proteins and you need to cut the bad sugars and all of this other stuff. And you don't need to really tell them that that's going to help with their metabolic health and chronic disease later on in life. But giving somebody the motivation that they need to move forward. And all of these things are related. So everything we're talking about, whether it's vanity or reverse aging or preventing chronic disease and osteoporosis and all of these things, they're all tied together. So if you are listening and you're a 70-year-old woman thinking, well, this is not an interview that I need to listen to, it absolutely is, because this all applies to all of us, female or male, and all ages. So I want to break down, before we get into the nitty gritty on fat loss and muscle gain, let's take a look at the body composition and the scan versus standing on the scale. I've talked about the fact that just the moon and the cycle can make you, or eating inflammatory foods the night before, can make you retain water and make the bathroom scale move up 3 pounds, 5 pounds, where that's not real. That tells you nothing. That doesn't tell you your bone density. That doesn't tell you your muscle mass, your fat loss. So will you go through the different components of body composition and what you're focused on?
Yes. And what you described really sets the stage for an educated dieter versus an ignorant dieter. So, and by ignorant, I'm not trying to be rude. By ignorant, I mean they're just unaware. So a lot of people will use a bathroom scale and they'll get a number, which is their body weight. And that gives information, but that information is not necessarily good information. It does not tell the story that needs to be told for people to optimize their physiques, in my case, since that's my focus. So what we really need to do as fitness professionals is to make sure that we're educating. And again, the context here is a weight loss client or somebody trying to lose body weight. That's at least the context that I'm going to talk about this in. So if somebody is on a diet or we're helping them lose weight, what we really are focusing on is losing body fat and trying to maintain as much muscle mass as possible. And the interesting thing is when we do the things that facilitate that process, where we target fat loss and we maintain muscle mass, the interesting thing is this: if you're only looking at body weight, it's not going to move much. And that sends a message to again, somebody who's uneducated that what they're doing isn't working. When the opposite is true, if they're resistance training, if they're consuming a moderately high protein diet, if they're doing aerobic exercise along with this, what's happening is they are losing body fat, and we're assuming they're in a caloric deficit, so they're losing body fat, but they're also maintaining and in some cases even increasing their lean muscle mass. And on the scale doesn't move as much when that happens. But if we use the correct kind of devices that give us that information, then it becomes obvious that things are working. Now, one thing that's very clear, if we can have our clients tune into this, is how their clothes are fitting. Whenever you lose body fat, even if you're maintaining or gaining muscle mass, your body really changes visually, whether you look at yourself in the mirror or how your clothes fit. But that's not as objective, and I like objective data. So everything I just said, I'll summarize with this. Your body weight does not tell the complete story. What we want is what I like to call a 2-compartment model, which is the simplest form of body composition that just divides the body into 2 compartments: fat mass and lean mass, or fat-free mass is what scientists call it. I usually just call it muscle mass, but it's actually a lot more than that. But so those 2 compartments, if you can understand what they are and track them, you are now an educated dieter, and you're going to have a lot more insight into what's working.
So just before we move on, when you stand on that in-body scan or get a DEXA scan or whatever is measuring your body composition, you've touched on a few things that could actually skew the results, like exercise or being dehydrated, some of those things. Can you touch on how those specific things can skew it, whether telling you actually have more muscle or less muscle, more fat or less fat than you actually do?
Yeah, so the way that you want to approach this, so again, I'm a scientist, but everybody needs to be a scientist when you're trying to make this when you're on a plan. You want to approach this as a scientist, and that means you just want to follow some procedures. So what we tell our research subjects is, before we get their body weight, what we want to do is make sure that you do that first thing in the morning after going to the restroom, so after urinating. And you always want to wear the same amount of clothes, so you're not changing that variable. And even this, if you are using a home-based scale, if that's all you have and that's all you're going to use, make sure that scale stays in the same place when you get your body weight. But if you're going to a facility where they have an InBody or a DEXA or BodPod or some type of body composition device, you want to, again, earlier in the morning, and clearly without eating food, you want your digestive system empty, because any food in your stomach is going to be tracked as either lean mass or body fat. And it's neither, it's food in your stomach. So you always want to do this early in the morning after an overnight fast. Now, and for research, we even have our subjects, they don't even exercise the day prior, because sometimes that can pull water into the muscles more. So we even take it that far. Now, I'm not suggesting everybody do that. If you don't go, and you also, another thing is hydration. You want to make sure that your hydration is pretty consistent. You don't want to let's say one day when you're going in for a scan or an in-body, you're drinking a lot of water and a lot of sodium, high sodium foods, and the next time you're dehydrated and you didn't have hardly any sodium. Those things can have a big impact on your body weight acutely within a couple of day-to-day variability. So always do this in the morning if at all possible, and always, regardless, I would say, make this possible, do this on an empty stomach so that you're controlling those variables as much as possible. And in terms of what it can do, this very interesting question. It really depends on the device and how sensitive the device is. So let's say like an InBody is based on bioelectrical impedance analysis. So that's what that does, is that sends a current through your body, actually a lot of currents, 256, I believe, if it's the InBody 570. And the speed that those currents, and by the way, you don't feel those currents, they're not detectable to us. The speed that those currents go through your body will estimate how much body water you have and how much body fat you have. So the more body fat you have, the more resistance there is to that current going through your body. So that will estimate a higher body fat percentage. But it really depends on the device, because if the device is, what you want is equal sensitivity from body weight to the resistance, and they're not always the same. So some scales you eat, let's just say you go in after eating, some scales will have you have more body fat, some will have you have more lean muscle mass. So it's not even the same from device to device. So again, to make it simple, do these assessments in the fasted state and ideally in the morning before any activity. So you didn't sweat. So you don't, again, so you're just being consistent from test to test.
Yeah, so comparing apples to apples, regardless of what your daily habits are, that makes complete sense. So now I want to get into the nitty gritty, as so many people have unexplained weight gain over the last couple of years, and I've really looked at liver health, fatty liver disease, what's causing this visceral fat, and outside of the stress that can trigger hormonal responses and fat gain and all of that. What are you finding for fat loss? How are we able to achieve this fat loss? And I know you just came out with some new research reviewed in the Body by Science. So let's get into, how does somebody achieve sustainable fat loss?
All right. So with body fat loss, and this is where my research has really focused much of my career, but in particularly over the last 6 years, multiple studies in males and particularly females. We've done more studies in females. They do tend to be a little younger. Most of the research that I've done, 20s to early 30s. And again, remember, I work with a relatively fit population most of the time. Sometimes I'm also doing fat loss studies in sedentary females, but most of the time they are also resistance training. So let me start with something that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know about just changing your body, in the sense that this will cause body fat loss, and it will, in some cases, actually increase your muscle mass without doing any exercise. Now, again, I want you to do exercise, but there's several studies, and one of these I reviewed, I think it was in the November issue of 2022 of my Body by Science research review. And what the researchers did, they had females with what they would call normal weight obesity. So what that means is they're females who don't appear to be obese the way that you would normally visualize somebody that with obesity. Rather, they're relatively normal body weights. So they again, they don't have this large body mass, but they do happen to carry a lot of body fat. And what that means is less lean tissue. So it's called normal weight obesity. And what they did is they gave one group a higher protein diet. So when scientists usually will do this in grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So they took them to 1.1 to about 1.8 grams per kg, the one group, and the other group, they just kept the same. They didn't change their protein. But the important thing is here, they didn't adjust their calories at all. They increased their protein, lowered their carbs. The other group, they just kept the same. And the group that increased their protein lost a significant amount of body fat, actually gained some lean tissue. And again, that's one study, but there have been multiple studies in humans showing the same thing. So I just want to start with that because most dietary approaches will include reducing your calories or going on a diet. But I would also suggest that doesn't have to be the case. If you're eating a low protein diet initially, and you just make that one change, the body responds with fat loss without reducing your calories at all. And that's always fascinated me, because when I was in grad school and as an undergrad, none of that makes sense. And again, it still doesn't make sense from a thermodynamic standpoint, because you're the same calories in, but it's still, I always want to share that, because protein is a very important nutrient for people trying to optimize their physiques or trying to lose body fat and gain muscle mass.
I always say prioritize protein. When you sit down, it's more satiating. A lot of times when you eat your protein first, you end up not eating the rest that's on your plate. you're protecting that muscle, and it feels good. Your brain loves it, your body loves it, your muscles love it the next day when you're ready to do your workout again. Now, you are talking about same calories across the board. And it's very interesting that you did this study with women, because when I go to girl parties or women gatherings, they're ordering salads and they're skimping on the protein, but then they're having a couple glasses of wine, but they think it's all the same calories. A calorie is a calorie. And this is showing you that that is not the case.
Yeah, protein is unique. And I use the same exact language you do. You prioritize protein. And another thing, and this is, I'm going to speak outside my area of expertise. And I think you said you have daughters.
Yes.
Or okay.
Two
So,
daughters.
and as do I have two daughters. And one thing that just I'm sensitive to, again, I'm outside my area of research, is the eating disordered eating, the messages from social media, the messages from friends.
Yeah.
So one thing I really like about just prioritizing protein within my own family is if you are prioritizing protein, that really defends against a lot of the physiological harm that if you're going to undereat. So if somebody were going to undereat, and we don't want that, we want people fueled for their lifestyles, for their exercise, for their activity. But if we can somehow implant that seed into young people, and again, we know that females are more susceptible to this, that still helps them prevent a lot of the physiological harm that if they were to undereat. So I also wanted to put that out there too. There's a lot of health benefits or protections from what some of people in our society struggle with a protein priority approach. What was that? Did you want me to get into just now like a general philosophy of fat loss?
Yes. So let's get into fat loss. What are the keys to actually achieving it? People are struggling with this unexplained weight gain. I'm assuming most people do exercise. They probably are trying to restrict their calories, but they might be doing both of those things wrong. So what are the key takeaways that someone can take where they're going to bullet points of what they need to do for fat loss?
So we'll divide this into two categories, the nutritional aspect and then an exercise or physical activity aspect. And we'll start with the nutrition. So we always will take a caloric deficit approach. Now, the type of diet or strategy that I think is the best for most people. Now, I'm going to stop there for a moment. Whatever diet or whatever eating patterns that people enjoy the most, that they're able to stick to, that is the best diet for them. So should somebody eat a ketogenic diet? Yes, if that's the best diet for them to lose body fat. Should somebody eat a Mediterranean diet? Yes, if that's the best diet. So to me, I'm very non-judgmental on the types of diets if the goal is fat loss. I just need you to eat the foods that allow you to remain in a caloric deficit. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't try to improve food choices over time, but I've over the years, I've adopted if people have unhealthy body fat levels, my first efforts are to reduce the body fat, because I think you can appreciate, when you have excess body fat and you eliminate that, you've just taken care of a lot of other health problems that people have that's associated with the excess adiposity. So that is the priority. So, but even though I'm the best diet for somebody's the one they'll follow, the type of approach that I think works well for a lot of people is called a protein anchored flexible dieting approach. So let's break down each of those terms. Protein anchored means, or as you use the word, prioritizing protein, same thing. We start with setting a protein intake goal. And as a scientist and as somebody who does research in this area, we use numeric goals. We have people, hitting a calorie goal, a protein goal. So essentially, we will reduce somebody's calories by about 25% from their maintenance. So they are dieting. and we focus on protein first. So the first calories in this plan is going to be prioritized by protein. That doesn't mean breakfast is all protein. It just means over the course of a day, we're going to make sure that we get this amount of protein. And that's about a range of about 0.75 grams of protein per pound, up to a gram of protein per pound of body weight. So if somebody weighs 130 pounds or 120 pounds, that would be about 90 to about 120 grams of protein per day. For somebody like me who's closer to 200 pounds, that would be 150 grams of protein up to 200 grams of protein per day. So we start there, protein anchored. And as you said earlier, why did we do that? Well, a couple of reasons. One, protein is the most satiating nutrient. It makes you feel the fullest and satiates you. Now, not all research reports that. There is some research that reports that it's no better than carbs or fat. But when you look at the totality of that research, one of two outcomes happens. Protein makes people feel more full, or it's never any worse than carbs and fat. So again, the preponderance of the evidence is if you're trying to help your hunger levels, which you should do things to help with that when you're dieting, a higher protein diet is best. The other two things that a higher protein diet does is it helps to maintain muscle mass when dieting, and it will help to protect your metabolism. And we can get into an entire discussion on what happens when you lose muscle when dieting. It's a very bad outcome post-diet. And if we have time and if you want to get into that, we can. But just at this point, let's just take my word, a fat loss researcher. We want to protect muscle when we're dieting, and protein helps do that. So now let's just say we have somebody who's typically eating, just to make this easy for me, 2,000 calories per day, and we're going to reduce their calories by 25%. So now they're eating 1,500 calories per day. And we prioritize protein, and let's say that comes to 700 calories, and that means we have 800 calories left over. Well, what do we do with those calories? In my opinion, I would suggest that it doesn't matter. You eat the foods that are the most enjoyable to you. And again, hopefully they're nutrient-dense whole foods. We can have a conversation about what you're inviting when you're having more highly processed foods. But I don't gravitate towards you need to eat low carb or you need to eat low fat. I'm very big on adherence. So the least amount of changes I can make to your plan, I think the more likely you are to stick to that plan. And again, that doesn't mean we don't try to make changes over time that are better for health outcomes, but we prioritize protein. The rest of the calories are up to you. And I'll give an example. My wife really likes carbohydrates. So when she's dieting currently, she's going to choose to eat more foods that are higher in carbs. I'm a little more, compared to her, I like more fatty foods. So I'm going to choose to eat more foods that are maybe a little higher in dietary fat to get the rest of my calories. So what I'm describing here is the flexible dieting approach. So we set a calorie goal, and then we say, okay, you need this much protein, and then the rest of your calories can come from fat and carbs. But you choose the foods, at least initially, and then if I'm helping somebody, I give advice on, hey, let's try substituting this for this. What do you think about that through the whole motivational interviewing approach as much as I can follow that? So helping them make those decisions. So I've been talking a lot. I don't know if you have any responses or follow-up questions on the protein anchored flexible dieting approach.
You and I are completely aligned. When the whole keto craze came out, I tried to eat a high fat diet, and I just didn't feel good. I love getting my fat with my wild animal protein, like the ribeye steak or whatever. I love that type of fat, but I don't dump on a whole bunch of fat onto my foods. I would choose, whole carb vegetables and fruits, and that's where I feel better. But I want to go back to the muscle loss. When people are dieting, when they lose that muscle, And this is happening with, there's these new diabetic injectable drugs that are people are using for weight loss. But what they don't realize is they're losing muscle and fat at the same time. And then when they try to get off the drug, they gain a whole bunch of fat back without getting their muscle. And that muscle is so expensive and amazing. You don't want to lose it. You've talked about this fat overshoot effect from dieting. So let's get into that and the risk of losing muscle.
Yeah. So listen to you, fat loss scientists. You're using all the research terms, the fat overshoot. So explaining that concept is a few studies have hypothesized that when we lose body weight, and this is particularly relevant when we go on a crash diet, losing fat very quickly, taking an extreme approach. So really low calories, tons of cardiovascular exercise, just in a big hurry, nothing sustainable about this. And so you lose a lot of body weight. And historically, when the diet ended, researchers would think that your body tends to gain the body weight back. Your body will want to gain body weight back until the point where you have the same amount of body fat that you had before you started dieting. It's known as a lipostatic theory. And several studies have challenged this, and they've said, we don't think that's what's happening. What's happening is you lose a lot of weight quickly in an unhealthy manner. What happens is when your diet's over, your body will want to gain body weight back up until the point where you gain back the muscle that you lost when dieting. So let me phrase that hopefully a little more simply. After the diet's over, if you've lost muscle mass, particularly if you've lost a lot of muscle mass, what happens is as soon as your diet is over, you've now induced a state which is known as hyperphagia. And that is an extreme drive to eat. It's really high levels of hunger. And a lot of people experience this. Again, think of your typical yo-yo dieter who's aggressive, crash dieting, that particular history. So if you've lost a lot of muscle mass, your body will have an elevated and very aggressively enhanced drive to eat until you gain back the muscle that you lost prior to your diet starting. And the unfortunate thing here is the term that you described. It's called fat overshoot. A lot of people will end up gaining significantly more body fat onto their bodies while they're trying to just recover the muscle mass that they lost. So this is a situation where they actually have gained more weight after their diets in a short period of time than what they had before they started their diet. It's called fat overshoot. So my philosophy and what we research in my lab is if that theory is true, then we want to do everything we can to protect muscle mass from day one. If muscle helps control hunger and muscle helps prevent fat overshoot, and by the way, your metabolism is directly tied to your muscle mass. If you lose muscle mass, you're going to suppress your metabolism. Mm-hmm. So we want to protect those very seriously from the first day of dieting. How do we do that? The first is a moderate caloric deficit, so we don't embrace crash dieting routines. Higher protein, we already talked about that. And now we can bring in the second component, which is exercise. So there's two broad types. There's resistance training and aerobic exercise. We have we place a focus on resistance exercise because that's the most anabolic stimulus for skeletal muscle. So when we're dieting, if you are resistance training, that's a stimulus to keep as much of that muscle mass as possible during the body fat loss process. And my research for the last several studies, we've lost nearly 100% of body weight from fat stores and keeping and maintaining all muscle mass. I do want to say this. Depending on the types of clients, if I'm talking to a fitness professional audience here, or even if I'm talking to somebody who just hates resistance training, any type of activity will help maintain muscle mass when dieting. So if somebody's not going to resistance train, my response is, okay, That would be the best form. But if you're not going to do that, I don't want to twist your arm and make you do that. But can you walk? Can you do some type of activity outdoors? Can you get on the treadmill? Can you get in the pool? Any type of activity that's stimulating the skeletal muscle fibers will help them to maintain their volume, their size, and prevent this hyperphagia, extreme hunger when your diet is over.
I would love to know if you know what hormones are being triggered to cause that extreme hunger. Is it a crossing of the wires with leptin or ghrelin, or is it cortisol, or is it just the body going into a severe survival state? I need to store on as much fat as possible because I don't know when I'm going to go into a starvation mode again.
Yeah, I don't, my research line is not hyper focused on hormonal changes, but what we do know is that leptin, as you lose body fat, and again, crash diets, you do lose body fat, but if you're losing a lot of lean tissue along with it, that's typically not a good long-term outcome. But leptin levels get very low, especially as you get lower and lower body fat levels. Again, I've done research in lean people, so a lot of who I study are competitive bodybuilders, and their leptin levels have literally gotten to the point where they're undetectable. That's how lean these people are. The other thing and let me also say, when I'm talking about all this, well, some of the research I have done in my lab, so a lot of this other research, I'm just talking about other people who have published research in this area. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm doing all of these studies. I'm not. But I do read them. One thing we do know, there's something called the growth hormone insulin-like growth factor, so IGF-1. So the GH-IGF-1 axis, and when we diet, that gets manipulated in an unfavorable way for anabolic activity in skeletal muscle. So typically, when we diet, we have an increase in growth hormone. And that's a good thing because growth hormone is catabolic to body fat, so it breaks down body fat. And normally, that growth hormone, if it gets higher, it will increase IGF-1 in the liver, and IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, is very anabolic to skeletal muscle. However, dieting, if it's extreme, it can impact this GH-IGF-1 axis, where typically growth hormone goes up, so does IGF-1, and then IGF-1 will have a feedback loop to tell the pituitary gland, hey, stop producing growth hormone. We don't need it since it's already high. Well, what happens in that case is when we're dieting severely, growth hormone continues to go up. IGF-1 is not produced at levels that it normally would be. And then we don't have this feedback loop. So growth hormone keeps getting higher and higher. And we don't have the IGF-1, which is, again, anabolic to skeletal muscle. So that's, we think, at least partly responsible for why we're losing muscle tissue when dieting with more of an aggressive approach. So there's some other hormones that they're not really hunger hormones. They're more anabolic hormones.
Wow, that makes sense. Well, I want to talk about weight loss plateaus because so many people who have been dieting for 30 years, right? And you hear of these women and men who have been on a diet for all of their life and they're not getting anywhere, or they haven't changed anything. They were losing weight and now they've hit a plateau. Can you talk about the science of weight loss plateaus?
Yes, yeah. And thank you for letting me talk about this. And I put this in my latest issue of my research review, which is Body by Science. If anybody wants to learn about that, just DM me, direct message me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is pretty easy to remember. It's Bill Campbell, Ph.D. I'll send you a link. But the article that I reviewed in this, and by the way, the Body by Science, I review articles that are solely focused on building muscle and losing body fat. And again, within a maintainable lifestyle. That's the key here. If you can't maintain it, then it's not really helpful. So one thing that a lot of research that has lasted 12 months, at least a year, we see a very similar outcome. And I'll encourage everybody, If you ever read scientific research and you find a study, a dieting study that was 12 months long or longer, I'm just going to assume you're going to see the same thing that I see in all of these studies. And what that is these subjects in these studies that are lasting a year, they're losing body weight up until about 6 months. And then from about 6 months onward, they gain some of that body weight back. So it starts aggressive, and then it starts just to go up a little bit. Now, they're not gaining all of their body weight back, but it's really interesting how consistent these year-long weight loss studies are. So we have to ask, and we're going to eliminate any medical hormonal abnormalities, metabolic disease. So we're not going to consider that. We're going to talk about what are some of the natural reasons why people, after about 6 months, at least according to these research studies, why do people not continue to lose body weight? And we call that a weight loss plateau. So there's two primary reasons of what would cause this. The first is called metabolic adaptation, or another term is called adaptive thermogenesis. So that concept is one where as you lose body weight, your metabolism slows down. And if it slows down so much, what used to be calories, a caloric deficit, what used to be like dieting calories, are no longer dieting calories because your metabolism has slowed down so much that what used to be a caloric deficit is now, sadly, your maintenance calories. So that's called adaptive thermogenesis. So that's a negative consequence of dieting. And by the way, just a plug, how do you prevent that? High protein resistance training. You can really prevent the loss of the metabolic rate. The other approach is one that a lot of people don't necessarily consider, and that is adherence. So let's use this as an example. And by adherence, I mean people just stop following the diet plan. They stop eating in a caloric deficit. So if somebody is, let's say I'm talking to a fitness professional, weight loss coach, you're working with a client, and they're losing body weight for a couple months, and then all of a sudden, they're checking in with you and they're no longer losing body weight. You have to process that. And at least for the last few years, there's been a lot of focus on this adaptive thermogenesis or metabolic adaptation. And I'm guilty of this as well. So I'm looking in the mirror when I say this. A lot of us are assuming, oh, you're experiencing a suppressed metabolism. Let's do this or X, Y, or Z. The research study that I summarized in the current issue of Body by Science tested this using mathematical modeling. So they use modeling from real people in real weight loss studies, and they fit their data to the extent that which model better predicts a weight loss plateau. Is it because these metabolic rates are slowing down so much that that's causing people to not be able to lose body weight anymore? Or is it more likely that they're just not following the diet anymore? And their results were the latter, that at least in these studies, and again, most of these studies are in people with obesity, they were just not adhering to the diet. And I call that diet fatigue. And that makes sense. If you're told to diet every single day for 365 days per year, there's a little bit of fatigue that sets in. And it just so happens that we have a lot of consistency that this seems to manifest itself at about 6 months. So in my research review, I just challenge people that are dieting themselves or that work with clients, weight loss clients. The challenge is we can't assume that just because a client is no longer losing body weight, we can't assume that it's metabolic. We can't assume that it's physiological. I challenge us. Let's make sure that we are covering, are you doing the things that got you to this point so far? If you're not, that's fun, that's good. We need honesty. But if you're fatigued, if you're over this for this period of time, and it's not physiological, it's not because your metabolism is suppressed, it's because you're simply not eating in a caloric deficit as much. That's very important to know, because now now we can suggest some other alternatives that would be different than if it were a true metabolic rationale for why they're experiencing a weight loss plateau. And sorry I'm talking so long, but hopefully you could digest all of that.
That was amazing. And I want to highlight what you said. To prevent this weight loss plateau is protein and resistance training. And we only have like a minute left, but I want you to, can someone then like trigger a response in their body and like overeat protein to rev up their metabolism and remind their body that they aren't starving and that, okay, it's safe to continue to lose weight and get off that plateau. So before we go, and you are definitely coming back on because there's so much more to talk about. Can you just touch on that? What can you do to remind your system that it's safe to continue losing weight?
So one of the things, and again, I would put out, and I'll try to do this in 30 seconds. I would put out several options for somebody in this situation. One of those options would be, let's stop dieting, or let's stop pretending that we're dieting, because you're obviously not, because you're not following the diet. So now let's work on the skill of maintaining your weight loss for a couple weeks, a couple months, because that's a skill. And I tell you, that's a skill that I struggle with. I'm great at losing body fat, not so good at maintaining a lower body fat level. So that's one option. The other option is exactly what you said. Maybe a macronutrient change in the diet could be another solution. It could even be a change in exercise. But I really like the idea of, hey, let's take a break from trying to lose more body weight. Let's actually set your caloric goal up to what you're probably already doing, but let's now give you the psychological permission to do this, rather than feeling bad that you're just not following it. And let's do that. And then after we can maintain that for, whatever we agree, a month, 2 months, 3 months, now we'll reduce again. And we'll probably have a much greater response to that next caloric deficit strategy.
Right. And this all takes into account, you have to also think back to what's the job of the fat cells. They're to store toxins. And there's some people that say, as you're losing a ton of fat weight, your body needs a little break to flush out the toxins, and then be able to lose a little more weight. But just some body confusion and different exercises. That's why running 8 miles a day loses its effect if that's all you do. And that's instead of incorporating jump rope or the strength training or different activities to confuse the body, confuse the muscles. Well, Bill, you are just such a wealth of knowledge, and I could talk to you for hours. Before we go, tell people again where to follow you on Instagram, social media, and to follow all of your research.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for letting me mention earlier too. I kind of took the opportunity. So the best place to find me is on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Bill Campbell, Ph.D. If you're interested in my research review, it's billcampbellphd.com. It's only $6.99 per month. For about another month, then the price is going to go up. But I'm telling you, if you like fat loss and muscle gain and the scientific evidence, it's like my third child. I think it's the best thing out there. So thank you for letting me brag about my my Body by Science research review.
Well, I'm going to be one of the subscribers because I know I'll just eat up all of your information. So thanks again. And we will definitely have you back on. And thank you everyone else for joining me today. If I can help you with your health issues, contact me through SaraBantaHealth.com. Happy to put together a protocol for you, and join my free group coaching on Telegram with the link below. I teach you on a daily basis with tips and tools to enhance your health. What did you learn today? Have you been on a weight loss plateau or have this unexplained weight gain that so many people are describing and complaining about? Let me know what you learned and what you've tried. The protocols and supplements that I have are all found at sarabantahealth.com, and I talk about body composition as well. You can also look at some of my past podcast topics about body composition. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram under Accelerated Health Products, across over 100 channels under Accelerated Health TV and radio show. And if you like what you heard today, please share with your friends and family and leave a comment. Join us every Mondays at 2 p.m. Pacific and Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific. And you can use coupon WELCOME10 for 10% off site-wide at sarabantahealth.com. Thanks again for joining us here, and have a great week.